A suspicious millionaire pretends to be on a business trip and hides in his own mansion to test his fiancée's true character. What he secretly uncovers is a cruel plot to drug his mother and steal his fortune. Betrayal, conspiracy, and attempted murder force him to face the harshest truth. But amid the chaos, a new figure emerges, reigniting not only hope, but also his heart. The Montgomery mansion, situated in the heart of Knightsbridge in London, was a landmark of opulence and power. Its meticulously cared-for gardens and imposing architecture reflected the success of its owner, Richard Montgomery, a 52-year-old man who had transformed a small startup into a multi-billion-dollar tech empire. On that sunny March morning, Richard watched the city's hustle and bustle from the panoramic window of his top-floor office in the mansion. His expression was one of concern, a rare sight for someone who always displayed unshakable confidence in business. "You don't seem yourself today, Mr. Montgomery," commented Judith, the housekeeper who had served the family for over 3 decades. "Judith, after so many years, you know me better than anyone," he sighed, turning to face the gray-haired woman. "It's about Veronica and my mother." Veronica Price, 34, a former model and current digital influencer, had entered Richard's life like a hurricane. The whirlwind romance culminated in an engagement after just 6 months, much to the surprise of London society and the concern of the Montgomery family, especially Mrs. Eleanor, the matriarch. "Your mother mentioned something to me yesterday," Judith said, placing a cup of coffee on the mahogany desk. "She was quite unsettled." Richard sat down, massaging his temples. "What did she say?" "That she saw Miss Veronica going through your documents in the main office. When your mother walked in, she shut the drawer quickly and made up an excuse." The revelation did not surprise Richard. In recent weeks, his mother's comments about Veronica had become more frequent and worrying. Mrs. Eleanor, despite facing the early stages of a degenerative illness, maintained an impressive lucidity at various times. "And there's more, sir," Judith continued, lowering her voice. "Mrs. Eleanor told me she woke up the night before last with Miss Veronica leaning over her. She said she pretended to stay asleep but felt she was tampering with her medication." Richard stood up, restless. "That's a serious accusation, Judith." "I know, sir. That's why I didn't want to mention it before I was certain. But yesterday I saw something odd myself." The housekeeper recounted that she had caught Veronica talking on the phone in the garden, away from the security cameras, mentioning getting rid of the problem, and that "the old woman is getting in the way of our plans." When she noticed Judith's presence, Veronica quickly ended the call. The businessman walked to the window again, his reflection in the glass showing the anguish he felt. He loved Veronica, or at least he thought he did. Her vibrant presence had brought color back into his life after years dedicated solely to business. But his mother's well-being was above any relationship. "Perhaps we're misinterpreting things," Richard pondered, more to himself than to Judith. Veronica could be referring to anything. "Mr. Montgomery, I've worked for your family for 32 years. I watched you grow up. I saw your company start in a garage and become this empire. I've never meddled in your personal life, but there's something about Miss Veronica that doesn't feel right. That smile, those eyes, they don't reach her soul." At that very moment, the sound of high heels echoed down the corridor. Veronica appeared at the door, stunning in a red dress that contrasted with her tanned skin. Her black hair was impeccably styled, as if she had just left a salon. "Talking about me?" she asked, with an enigmatic smile, looking from Judith to Richard. "Just discussing the charity dinner on Saturday," Richard replied, exchanging a knowing glance with the housekeeper. Judith was just leaving. After the housekeeper left, Veronica approached Richard, wrapping her arms around his neck. "I can't wait to officially become a Montgomery," she whispered, kissing him softly. "Only 2 more months until the wedding." "About that," Richard said, gently pulling away. "I need to travel to Silicon Valley next week, an important investment that can't wait." Veronica frowned. "But what about the final preparations? We need to decide on the decor, the international guest list." "It will be quick, I promise, 10 days at most. Will you and my mother be all right?" "Of course," she replied, her smile returning. "I'll take the opportunity to get even closer to Mrs. Eleanor. I want her to see me as a daughter." The words sounded sweet, but something in her tone made Richard shudder internally. Later that day, after a visit to his mother's room, where Mrs. Eleanor was sleeping peacefully, Richard made his decision. In his office, he called Ray, his head of security and a long-time friend. "I need your help with something strictly confidential," Richard began, closing the door. "I'm not really going to California next week." Ray, a 50-year-old former police officer who had worked for the family's security for over a decade, listened intently. "I'm going to stay here hidden. I need you to disable the cameras in the west corridor and the guest room in the isolated wing. No one can know I'm in the mansion." "Are you suspecting something, sir?" Richard hesitated for a moment. "Let's just say I need to confirm a few things before the wedding." "I understand," Ray replied, asking no further questions. "And what about Mrs. Eleanor's security?" "Install hidden cameras in her room and the adjacent corridor. I want to monitor everything that happens in that wing." "And Miss Veronica, won't she notice the changes to the systems?" "She rarely checks the security system, but as a precaution, create a loop that shows the normal footage from the disabled cameras." As they planned the technical details, Richard felt a mix of shame and determination. He was about to spy on his own home, his fiancée, but his intuition, or was it his love for his mother, told him it was necessary. The next morning, during breakfast on the veranda overlooking the lush gardens, Richard watched Veronica interact with Mrs. Eleanor. The elderly woman, still elegant at 78, maintained a proud posture despite the illness that was slowly consuming her memory. "Is your tea too hot, dear?" Veronica asked, with a solicitude that seemed genuine to the less observant eye. "It's fine as it is," Mrs. Eleanor replied curtly. Her blue eyes, still sharp, analyzed her future daughter-in-law with poorly concealed suspicion. "Mother, be nice," Richard intervened, even though he knew his mother's coldness might be justified. "I have always been known for my honesty, son, not for my kindness," the old woman retorted, provoking a restrained smile from Veronica. That breakfast marked the beginning of a risky plan. In 5 days, Richard would supposedly fly to the United States. In reality, he would hide in the secret room built years earlier as a security measure, back when threats against businessmen were common in London. The operation had to be flawless. No one but Judith and Ray would know the truth. And in the silence of that hideout, Richard would discover if he was about to make the biggest mistake of his life, or if the suspicions were nothing more than a misunderstanding. As he watched Veronica smile and make plans for the period of his absence, a question echoed in his mind: who really was the woman he was about to marry? If this story interested you, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and tell us what city you're watching from. Continuing, the night Richard supposedly left for the United States was meticulously planned. With his bags properly packed, the businessman said goodbye to Veronica and his mother in the mansion's main hall, while Ray waited in the car that would take him to Heathrow International Airport. "I'm going to miss you," Veronica whispered, hugging him tightly. "Come back soon, my love." Mrs. Eleanor merely kissed her son's cheek. "Be careful, Richard," she said, with a meaningful look that went beyond the usual concern for a trip. What no one except Ray and Judith knew was that the car would only drive around the block. After a few minutes, it would enter through the mansion's secondary garage, allowing Richard to return discreetly. Through a hidden passage in the basement, he would reach the secret room in the west wing, from where he could monitor the main events in the house. By 11 p.m., Richard was settled in his hideout. The room, originally designed as a safe room in case of a kidnapping, had been adapted in the last few days. It now featured monitors displaying footage from the cameras scattered throughout the mansion, especially in Mrs. Eleanor's room and the main living areas. "Everything's set, sir," Ray confirmed over the secure communicator. "The staff have been instructed to follow their normal routine. Judith will keep a personal eye on everything." The first night passed without incident. Veronica had dinner with Mrs. Eleanor, watched a film in the living room and went to bed early. The apparent normality almost made Richard question his plan, but something told him to wait. The next morning, around 9 a.m., Veronica appeared impeccably dressed. After having breakfast alone, Mrs. Eleanor had already eaten earlier, attended by her caregiver. She made a call from the mansion's landline. "Yes, he left yesterday. We have at least 10 days, she said in a low tone. "No, I can't talk now. Come over tonight after everyone's asleep." That brief conversation was enough to set off alarms for Richard. Who was she talking to? Why did the meeting have to be secret? The day went on with Veronica, alternating between seemingly attentive visits to Mrs. Eleanor's room and long periods in the mansion's gym or the solarium. Around 4 p.m., something unusual happened. She entered Richard's main office, a place he rarely left unlocked when he traveled. Through the strategically placed camera, the businessman watched, stunned, as Veronica typed the combination to the safe built into the wall, a combination he had never shared with her. From inside, she removed a folder of documents that Richard recognized immediately, the prenuptial agreement and copies of the deeds to his properties. "My God," he muttered to himself. Veronica meticulously photographed each page with a phone Richard had never seen before. It wasn't the latest generation's smartphone he had given her for her last birthday. After carefully putting everything back in its place, she left the office as if nothing had happened. At 10 p.m., when most of the staff had retired for the night, except for the perimeter security guards, the security system registered a vehicle entering through the main gate. The man who got out of the sports car was familiar to Richard. Paul Rivers, supposedly Veronica's brother, whom she had briefly introduced during a dinner months ago. Veronica received Paul in the private sitting room, an area with no regular cameras, but where Ray had installed temporary surveillance devices. "You're late," Veronica complained, but instead of the fraternal greeting expected between siblings, she pulled him into an intense, passionate kiss. Richard's stomach churned. There it was, the first betrayal unmasked. Her supposed brother was, in fact, her lover. "Did you get the documents?" Paul asked, pouring himself a whiskey from the bar. "I photographed everything." "Send them to the lawyer to review," she replied, sitting on the sofa. "The prenup has a lot of protective clauses, but nothing we can't get around with a few strategic alterations." Paul smiled, revealing perfect teeth that matched his magazine model looks. "And the old woman still causing trouble?" "More and more. I suspect she's noticed something. Yesterday she caught me looking at her medicine box and made a point of telling that meddling housekeeper. We need to act faster then," Paul said, moving closer. "The doctor assured me no one will suspect a thing. With her illness, it's perfectly plausible for her to have a more severe episode." Richard's blood ran cold as he understood the meaning of those words. This wasn't just about access to documents or money. His mother's life was in danger. "I started increasing her dosage today," Veronica continued, with a coldness that shocked Richard. "I replaced some of her pills with similar-looking ones. In a few days, she'll be disoriented enough to sign any document without understanding it." "And the son? Richard, he trusts me blindly. He's so infatuated he doesn't even question it when I say I need his credit card for emergencies. I've already transferred over 200,000 to our account in the last few weeks." Paul laughed, hugging her from behind. "You were always the best actress I knew. You almost convinced me you were in love with me at the beginning." "And who says I wasn't?" she purred, turning to kiss him again. "But love doesn't pay our debt to Jacobs, nor does it buy that house in St. Ives we want." The two continued to talk about their future plans, mentioning details about how to have Mrs. Eleanor committed when the time came, and how Veronica would convince Richard to transfer a significant portion of his assets into her name even before the wedding. Hours later, when Paul finally left the mansion, Richard was devastated. His suspicions had not only been confirmed, the reality was even worse than he had imagined. His fiancée was not only cheating on him with her supposed brother, but was also conspiring against his mother and his fortune. The next morning, with dark circles under his eyes from a sleepless night, Richard watched on the monitors as Judith entered Mrs. Eleanor's room to serve breakfast. His mother seemed more confused than usual, taking a long time to recognize the housekeeper. "Mrs. Eleanor, are you feeling all right?" Judith asked, visibly concerned. There's something wrong with my medicine," the elderly woman replied with difficulty. "I don't feel like myself. It feels like I'm floating." That was enough for Richard. He activated the secure communicator with Ray. I need you to discreetly collect my mother's medication and take it for immediate analysis, he ordered, and call Dr. Thompson for an emergency visit. Tell him it's urgent, but don't arouse suspicion. While he waited, Richard continued to monitor. He saw Veronica enter his mother's room around 11 a.m., carrying a tray with a glass of water and some pills. "Time for your medicine, Mrs. Eleanor," she said sweetly. "This will make you feel better." "I don't want it," Mrs. Eleanor mumbled, trying to push the tray away. "Where's my son? I want Richard. He's traveling, remember. He'll be back in a few days. Now, be a good patient and take your medicine." Judith, who had entered the room at that moment, quickly intervened. "Let me help Mrs. Eleanor with her medicine, miss. The cook is calling you to approve the dinner menu." For a moment, Veronica hesitated, clearly annoyed. But then she smiled, handing the tray to Judith. "Of course, thank you. I'll be back later to see how she is." As soon as Veronica left, Judith discreetly tucked the pills into a handkerchief, replacing them with the original medication she had hidden. "Don't you worry, Mrs. Eleanor. Everything will be all right," she whispered, gently squeezing the elderly woman's hand. On the other side of the monitors, Richard breathed a sigh of relief. He was now absolutely certain he had to act, and fast, before Veronica and Paul's sinister plan could be fully realized. The question was how to do it without revealing that he had been spying on his own house, and without putting his mother at even greater risk. That night, as he watched, Veronica talking on the phone in the garden, again using the secret mobile, Richard made his decision. He would have to confront her, but not before ensuring his mother's safety and gathering enough evidence to completely unmask the sham that was their relationship. Dr. Francis Thompson arrived at the Montgomery mansion shortly after 2 p.m., carrying his traditional brown leather medical bag. A friend of the family for decades and Mrs. Eleanor's personal physician since her degenerative disease was diagnosed, the 65-year-old was greeted discreetly by Judith, who led him to the matriarch's room without notifying Veronica. "She's been like this since last night," Judith explained in a low voice as they walked down the corridor. "Confused, drowsy, not her usual self." Upon entering the room, they found Mrs. Eleanor reclining in bed, her gaze lost in the direction of the window overlooking the conservatory. Even in her current state, she maintained the elegant posture that had characterized her throughout her life as one of London's most respected socialites. "Mrs. Eleanor, how are you feeling today?" the doctor asked, approaching gently. The elderly woman turned slowly. "Francis, I'm so glad you came. There's something wrong with me." The doctor performed a detailed examination, checking her vital signs and conducting simple cognitive tests. His expression grew more serious with each passing minute. When he finished, he asked to speak with Judith in the hallway. "This is not normal, even considering the progression of the disease," he stated flatly. "The symptoms suggest some kind of excessive sedation or an improper drug interaction. I need to see the medication she's taking." Judith pulled the handkerchief containing the pills she had intercepted earlier from her uniform pocket. "These are what Mr. Montgomery's fiancée was trying to give her today." Dr. Thompson examined the medication carefully. "Some look similar to what's prescribed, but there are others here that are certainly not part of her treatment. I'll take these to the lab for analysis. In the meantime, suspend any medication that doesn't come directly from me." What neither of them knew was that Veronica was watching the scene from the end of the corridor, partially hidden. As soon as the doctor and Judith moved away, she silently retreated, typing a message on her secret phone. In his hideout, Richard followed everything on the monitors. He saw Veronica rush into her room and start making a call. "Paul, we have a problem. Her doctor is here and that meddling housekeeper intercepted the pills. Yes, I'm worried. If they find out... No, I can't wait until tomorrow. Get over here now. We need to rethink the plan." This was the moment Richard had been waiting for. With concrete evidence and his mother under the care of Dr. Thompson and Judith, he could finally act. He contacted Ray through the secure system. "I'm leaving the hideout. Assemble the security team in the main office in 10 minutes, and make sure Veronica doesn't leave the mansion." When Richard finally emerged from the secret room, he felt a mixture of anger, disappointment, and determination. First, he went to his mother's room, where Dr. Thompson was still performing additional tests. "Richard!" exclaimed Mrs. Eleanor, momentarily lucid upon seeing her son. "Weren't you travelling?" "That's what everyone was supposed to think, Mother," he replied, kissing her forehead. "How is she, Doctor?" "Stable for now, but she needs care. We suspect her medication has been tampered with." "I know," Richard said gravely. "I know everything." After giving precise instructions for his mother's security, Richard headed downstairs. On the way, he crossed paths with Veronica in the main corridor. The surprise on her face was priceless. "Richard, my God, you're back early. Why didn't you let me know?" "I didn't let you know for the same reason you didn't tell me about your relationship with Paul or about your plan to tamper with my mother's medication," he replied coldly. Veronica's face turned pale. For a moment her eyes revealed panic, but she quickly regained her composure. "What are you talking about? Paul is my brother, you know that. And as for the medicine, I don't know what Judith has been making up, but—" "Enough. Lies, Veronica," Richard interrupted. "I know everything. I saw everything. You and Paul, the documents from my safe that you photographed, the conversations about getting rid of the problem, which was my mother. I never left London." Before she could respond, the security system announced the arrival of a vehicle. On the external cameras, they recognized Paul's sports car. "Just in time for our final conversation," Richard commented. The confrontation took place in the mansion's spacious living room. Paul, upon entering and seeing Richard, tried to maintain the pretense of being his brother-in-law, but he was quickly silenced. "Spare us. The theatrics. I have recordings of the two of you in moments that siblings certainly wouldn't share," Richard said, gesturing to Ray, who activated one of the screens built into the wall, displaying images of the couple kissing the previous night. Veronica, realizing the game was over, changed her demeanor completely. Her sweet facade gave way to a hard expression, almost unrecognizable to Richard. "You wouldn't understand," she said, her voice laced with contempt. "You were born with a silver spoon, had everything in life. We had to fight for every penny." "So this was your fight?" "Deceiving a man. Who trusted you and harming a sick elderly woman?" "Your mother was always the problem," Veronica retorted. "From the very beginning she looked at me as if I were inferior, as if she could see right through me. And she was right, wasn't she? She saw what you, in love like a teenager, couldn't see." Paul, who had remained calculatedly silent until then, intervened. "Let's be practical, Richard. We have a stalemate here. You have your proof. We have ours." "What proof?" "Let's just say we've recorded some of your conversations about financial transactions that certain tax authorities would find. Very interesting. The blackmail attempt was the pair's final mistake." Richard smiled coldly. "Do you really think that I, with all my resources, wouldn't have checked your backgrounds? I know exactly who you are. Paul Rivers, or rather Richard Peters, with 3 fraud charges against you in London and Birmingham. And you, Veronica, or should I say Priscilla Sands, with a considerable record for scams in Leeds." The shock on their faces was visible. Richard continued, "The police are on their way, not for the crimes against me, I'd rather avoid the scandal, but for the 3 previous. Victims who filed formal complaints. 2 elderly people and a real estate developer. The same modus operandi, isn't it?" Paul made a move toward Richard, but was quickly restrained by the security guards who had discreetly entered the room. Veronica, for her part, tried one last desperate plea. "Richard, please," she said, tears welling in her eyes. "Everything I experienced with you was real. Paul manipulated me, forced me into all of this. I really do love you." "Save your talent for your statement at the station," he replied, turning away. "Judith, please escort the young lady to her quarters to collect her personal belongings. You have 1 hour to leave my house." As the security guards escorted Paul out and Veronica headed to her room, accompanied by Judith, Richard felt the weight of the past few days crash down on his shoulders. The adrenaline that had kept him going gave way to a profound exhaustion and a disappointment that seemed to gnaw at him from the inside. He went to his mother's room, where Dr. Thompson was finishing his care. Mrs. Eleanor was sleeping peacefully now, her breathing regular. "She's going to be fine," the doctor assured him. "We managed to reverse the effects of the altered medication in time, but I recommend special care over the next few days. I can recommend a nurse who specializes in geriatrics. Please do, Richard requested. I want the best possible care for her. Hours later, with the mansion finally free of Veronica and Paul's presence, Richard remained by his mother's bedside, holding her delicate hand. The day's events seemed like a distant nightmare, but the emotional wounds were just beginning to form. Judith entered the room silently, carrying a tray with tea. "You need to rest, Mr. Montgomery. It's been a difficult day." "How did I not see it before, Judith? How was I so blind?" The housekeeper sighed, sitting in the nearby chair. "The heart plays tricks on us sometimes. It sees what it wants to see, ignores the signs. Don't blame yourself." "I almost lost my mother because of that blindness. But you didn't. You acted in time. And now, you need to move on." At that moment, Richard's phone vibrated. It was a message from Dr. Thompson. "Nurse confirmed. Beatrice Oliver will arrive tomorrow at 8 a.m. Excellent references, specialist in cases like Mrs. Eleanor's." Richard mentally thanked the doctor. Perhaps the arrival of this professional would be the beginning of recovery, not just for his mother, but for his own ability to trust again. The next morning, as the sun rose over the mansion's impeccable gardens, the doorbell rang at precisely 8 a.m. Judith answered the door and led the visitor to the main hall, where Richard was waiting. "Mr. Montgomery, this is Beatrice Oliver, the nurse recommended by Dr. Thompson," Judith introduced. The woman who entered exuded a quiet competence. In her well-lived 40s, with brown hair tied in a discreet bun and green eyes, that conveyed both seriousness and empathy, Beatrice greeted Richard with a firm handshake. "It's a pleasure to meet you, Mr. Montgomery, though I wish it were under happier circumstances," she said, with a melodious voice that immediately conveyed a sense of calm. "Dr. Thompson explained your mother's situation to me. I have experience with similar cases, and will do everything in my power to provide the best possible care." Something in Beatrice's direct and honest manner touched Richard. There was no artifice or calculated charm in her words, just genuine professionalism and real compassion. "Welcome, Mrs. Oliver. My mother is the most important person in my life. I trust she will be in good hands." "You can call me Beatrice, and I promise to honor that trust," she replied, with a discreet smile that, for the first time in many days, made Richard feel that maybe, just maybe, the future could be a little brighter than the grim present he was facing. 2 weeks had passed since Veronica's dramatic departure from the Montgomery mansion. The news of the most eligible bachelor in London breaking off his engagement sparked speculation in high society, but Richard maintained absolute discretion about the real reasons, merely confirming that the relationship had ended due to irreconcilable differences. The routine in the Knightsbridge mansion began to stabilize under a new rhythm. Mrs. Eleanor showed significant improvement after the substances administered by Veronica were stopped, gradually regaining her lucidity and strength. Much of this recovery was attributed to the meticulous care of Beatrice Oliver. On that April morning, while having his coffee on the terrace overlooking the conservatory, Richard watched Beatrice lead his mother on a slow walk along the stone paths between the tropical plants. The nurse gently held Mrs. Eleanor's arm, patiently, adjusting to the elderly woman's pace, chatting with her animatedly. "She really is special, isn't she?" Judith commented, pouring more coffee for Richard. "Who? My mother?" he asked distractedly. "Her too, but I was referring to Beatrice. In just 2 weeks, she's managed what doctors have been trying to do for months. Get Mrs. Eleanor to follow an exercise routine without complaining." Richard smiled, acknowledging the truth in the housekeeper's words. "She has a unique way about her. She doesn't treat my mother like a patient, but as a whole person with dignity. And Mrs. Eleanor loves that. Just yesterday, she told me she's finally found someone who doesn't treat her like a senile old lady." The conversation was interrupted when Ray, the head of security, approached with a serious expression. "Mr. Montgomery, we have that situation to discuss," he said discreetly. Richard nodded, standing up. "In the office in 5 minutes." In the spacious, wood-paneled office, Ray presented his report on the whereabouts of Veronica and Paul after they left the mansion. They went to a flat in Shoreditch initially. 3 days later, Paul took a flight to Manchester, while Veronica remained in London. She tried to contact you several times, but we followed your instructions and blocked all calls. Any indication they're planning something? Nothing concrete, but I've received information that Paul was seen talking to a lawyer known for blackmail cases against businessmen. Richard sighed deeply. The threat, though latent, seemed distant now. His priority was his mother's recovery and reorganizing his life after the emotional turmoil of the past few weeks. Keep them under surveillance, but discreetly. I don't want my mother or the staff to worry about this. We've been through enough stress. Upon returning to the terrace, he found Beatrice helping Mrs. Eleanor to sit down. The elderly woman looked flushed and more cheerful than in previous days. "Richard, dear," Mrs. Eleanor called out. "Beatrice was telling me about a social project she coordinates on the weekends, a community clinic in the suburbs. You should hear about it." Beatrice seemed slightly embarrassed. "It's just volunteer work, nothing special." "Don't be modest," the old woman insisted. "My son has resources and is always looking for serious projects to support. Tell him." Encouraged by Mrs. Eleanor, Beatrice explained the project she had started 3 years earlier, using her days off to offer free nursing care in an underserved community in London's East End. "We started in a room lent by the neighbourhood association. Today we have 4 volunteer nurses, but we still lack so much: equipment, basic medicines, a larger space." Richard listened intently, impressed not only by the initiative but by the contained passion with which Beatrice spoke, without any intention of impressing him or asking for anything directly. "I'd like to visit this project," he said finally. "Perhaps the Montgomery Foundation could help." "That would be wonderful," Beatrice replied with a discreet smile. "But only after Mrs. Eleanor is fully recovered. My priorities are very clear." That response, which placed his mother's well-being above the opportunity to get funding for her own project, touched Richard deeply. It was a stark contrast to Veronica, whose actions always concealed personal interests. In the following days, Richard found himself observing Beatrice with growing interest. Not just her professional dedication, but small gestures: how she read poetry to Mrs. Eleanor on rainy afternoons, how she personally prepared teas with herbs she grew, how she treated all the mansion's staff with the same respect she gave the family. One particularly pleasant afternoon, while Mrs. Eleanor was resting after lunch, Richard found Beatrice in the mansion's library, engrossed in a book of poetry by T.S. Eliot. "Sorry to interrupt," he said, approaching. "You're not interrupting," she replied, closing the book. "Just enjoying a few minutes while your mother rests." "You like poetry?" "Very much. Words have a healing power, you know. As much as medicine sometimes." Richard sat in the opposite armchair. For a moment, he observed Beatrice's serene face, her delicate hands holding the book with reverent care. There was something profoundly authentic about her that intrigued him. How did someone with your training and talent end up choosing to care for the elderly? It's a difficult specialty, emotionally draining. Beatrice remained silent for a few moments, as if organizing her thoughts. "My father," she said finally. "He suffered from the same illness that affects Mrs. Eleanor. I took care of him for 5 years until the end. It was the most challenging and, paradoxically, the most rewarding experience of my life." "That must have been very difficult." "It was, but it taught me that there is no greater dignity than providing comfort to someone who is vulnerable. After him, I specialized in geriatrics and never looked back." The conversation flowed naturally to other topics: favorite books, places in London they both appreciated, childhood memories. Without realizing it, they spent nearly 2 hours talking, until Beatrice's pager signaled that Mrs. Eleanor had woken up. "I have to go," she said, standing up. "It was a pleasure talking with you, Beatrice, truly." She smiled, that restrained smile that started at her lips and gradually lit up her eyes. "Likewise, Mr. Montgomery." "Richard," he corrected. "Please call me Richard." From that day on, small conversations became part of their routine, sometimes in the library, other times during Mrs. Eleanor's walks in the garden or after dinner, once the old woman had retired for the night. They were simple moments, but ones that Richard began to look forward to with growing anticipation. One Saturday morning, Richard surprised Beatrice with an unexpected proposal. I'd like to accompany you to your project in the East End today, if you don't mind the company, of course." Beatrice seemed momentarily taken aback. "Are you sure? It's not a neighborhood like Knightsbridge." "That's precisely why I want to see it with my own eyes." After ensuring that Mrs. Eleanor would be fine in the care of Judith and the assistant caregiver, they left in Beatrice's car, a compact model a few years old, well-maintained, but far from the luxury Richard was used to. During the nearly hour-long drive across the city, they talked about the contrasting reality of London. Beatrice spoke with first-hand knowledge about the public health challenges in the suburbs without romanticism or excessive drama, just the clarity of someone who knew the reality up close. The Hope Community Centre, where Beatrice's project operated, was a simple two-story building on a quiet street in the borough of Newham. Right at the entrance, a line of people, mostly elderly and mothers with young children, was waiting for care. "We usually start at 9, but I always get here early to set everything up," Beatrice explained, warmly greeting people who clearly recognized and respected her. For the next few hours, Richard witnessed a side of the city he rarely saw. He watched Beatrice coordinate the other volunteers, personally handle more complex cases, and manage the limited resources with impressive efficiency. There was no pretense in her work, just genuine dedication and profound respect for each patient. "This lady needs a hypertension medication that we couldn't get from the local clinic," Beatrice explained discreetly to Richard after attending to an elderly patient. "It costs less than £100 a month, but for her, that's half her pension." Without any fanfare, Richard asked one of the volunteers to buy the medication immediately, paying for it with his own money. Throughout the day, other similar cases arose, and he quietly provided immediate solutions. At the end of the afternoon, while helping Beatrice organize the center's small pharmacy, Richard made a decision. "I want to help expand this project," he said, simply. "Not just with money, but with infrastructure. A larger space, proper equipment, maybe even paid professionals to supplement the volunteer work." Beatrice stopped what she was doing, visibly moved. "Why?" "Because it's important. Because it makes a real difference in these people's lives, and because you deserve to have the resources to fully realize this work." "Thank you," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "But I need you to understand one thing. I didn't take the job with your mother thinking I would get funding for the project." "I know," Richard replied with a smile. "That's exactly why. I decided to help, because at no point did you try to impress me or use your position for personal gain. That, Beatrice, is a precious rarity in my world." On the way back to the mansion, they talked excitedly about possibilities for the project. Beatrice shared dreams she had kept to herself: a complete community clinic, preventive programs for the elderly, partnerships with universities for supervised internships. When they arrived, they found Mrs. Eleanor in the living room, playing cards with Judith, an activity she hadn't done in months even before Veronica's arrival. "Look who's remembered. How to play bridge," Judith exclaimed cheerfully. Mrs. Eleanor smiled, observing her son and the nurse side by side. "It seems you two had a productive day. Beatrice, you're flushed." "It's the sun, Mrs. Eleanor," Beatrice replied quickly. "It was warm in the East End today." Later that night, after a quiet dinner, Richard met with Ray again for updates on Veronica and Paul. "Worrying news, sir," the security chief reported. "Paul has returned to London. They were both seen near the building where Beatrice's mother lives, in Islington." How did they know about her mother? How did they find the address? They likely investigated. She had been an employee here before. Perhaps they're looking for information about the current situation at the house. An immediate concern took hold of Richard. Reinforce security at the mansion and arrange for discreet protection for Beatrice's mother. I don't want to scare her with this yet, but we need to be vigilant. When Ray left, Richard remained in his office, reflecting. What had begun as a professional replacement to care for his mother had turned into something deeper. Beatrice had brought not only medical care for Mrs. Eleanor, but a luminous presence to the entire house. And for him, something he hadn't expected to find so soon, the possibility of trusting again. As he looked out the window at the city lights in the distance, Richard knew that new challenges were approaching. Veronica and Paul still posed a threat, and his own ability to open up to a new relationship was scarred by the recent betrayal. But for the first time in weeks, he felt hope, not just for his mother's recovery, but for the possibility of rebuilding his own capacity to believe in people again. The month of May brought an explosion of color to the gardens of the Montgomery mansion. The flowering cherry trees and magnolias contrasted with the blue autumn sky, creating an almost picturesque scene. Mrs. Eleanor's recovery was progressing surprisingly well. In recent weeks, she had resumed old routines, tea gatherings with longtime friends, reading the entire morning paper without fatigue, and even making small interferences in the household management, to Judith's good-humored despair. She criticized the floral arrangement in the sitting room today, the housekeeper commented during breakfast, feigning indignation. Said the orchids should be positioned differently. That means our Mrs. Eleanor is back. Richard and Beatrice exchanged smiles. The nurse's presence in the mansion had transformed into something that transcended the professional. Although she maintained impeccable work ethics, it was impossible not to notice how she had naturally integrated into the family dynamic, bringing a serenity that had been absent from that house for a long time. Dr. Thompson was impressed with the results of her latest tests, Beatrice commented, helping herself to a slice of whole wheat toast. Her cognition has improved significantly in the last few weeks. Thanks to you, Richard replied. Not just me. A stable, stress-free family environment makes all the difference, for patients like your mother. The conversation was interrupted when Ray entered discreetly, giving Richard a subtle signal. Excusing himself, the businessman followed the head of security into an adjacent room. What is it? We intercepted something concerning, Ray said, handing over an envelope. A piece of mail addressed to Beatrice arrived early this morning. As part of the enhanced security protocols, we checked it and found this. Inside the envelope was an elegant card with the logo of a famous London medical clinic. The content seemed innocent, an invitation for Beatrice to attend a symposium on advanced geriatric care, to be held the next day at a hotel on Regent Street. At first glance it looked legitimate, Ray continued. But something bothered me. I checked with the clinic mentioned, and they confirmed. They are not hosting any event tomorrow. The invitation is a fake. A chill ran down Richard's spine. Veronica and Paul. Most likely. The digital signature on the document was traced to a cyber cafe in Shoreditch, near their last known address. What would be the goal? To lure Beatrice somewhere? Ray nodded gravely. Exactly. The invitation specifically mentions she should come alone, as spaces are limited and personalized, a classic tactic to isolate the target. We need to warn her, but without causing unnecessary panic, Richard concluded, his face hardening with concern. And we need to turn the tables on them. After a brief strategic meeting, Richard returned to the breakfast table, maintaining a calm demeanor. At an appropriate moment, he mentioned casually, Beatrice, Ray informed me that an invitation arrived for you, about a medical symposium tomorrow. That's strange, she replied, frowning. I'm not expecting any invitations. Who is it from? From the Horizon Clinic, about advanced geriatrics. I know the Horizon Clinic well. I worked there for 2 years before focusing on home care. They usually invite me to their events, but normally by email, not by post. Richard exchanged a significant look with Ray, who remained nearby. The confirmation that something was wrong was evident. Actually, Richard continued carefully, there's something about this invitation we need to discuss. In private. In the office, Richard explained the situation to Beatrice, who listened with growing concern. I believe Veronica and Paul are trying to set some kind of trap, he concluded. I don't know their exact objective, but it's clearly nothing good. Beatrice remained silent for a few moments, processing the information. That would explain something that happened last week. My mother mentioned seeing a man photographing our house in Islington. I didn't think much of it at the time. Why didn't you tell me? Richard asked, more concerned than reprimanding. I didn't want to bring personal problems into the workplace. Besides, my mother is 70 and sometimes, well, I thought it might just be her confusion. Richard made an immediate decision. I want your mother to come here temporarily. We have several guest rooms and it will be safer for her. Beatrice seemed uncomfortable with the suggestion. I don't want to impose on your generosity. This goes far beyond our professional relationship. That's exactly why I insist, Richard replied, moving closer. What's happening has crossed professional boundaries. Veronica and Paul are targeting you because they've realized your importance to this house, to my mother, to me. The last phrase hung in the air between them, charged with meanings not yet fully explored. Beatrice looked down, a light blush coloring her cheeks. I'll talk to my mother, she finally agreed. Mrs. Gloria is stubborn, but I think I can convince her for a few days. While they discussed the practical details, Ray returned with more information. The investigation had revealed that Paul had recently rented a room in a commercial building near the supposed location of the fake symposium. I think we have an opportunity here, Richard said, an idea forming in his mind. What if, instead of avoiding the trap, we use it against them? The following afternoon, Mrs. Gloria, a lively woman with a sharp gaze that made it clear from whom Beatrice had inherited her temperament, was already settled in one of the comfortable guest rooms of the mansion. Initially reluctant, she soon became charmed by Mrs. Eleanor, the two discovering a kinship in their straightforward views on life. Your mother is lovely, Mrs. Eleanor commented to Richard as the two ladies shared tea on the veranda. She has the same indomitable spirit as Beatrice. Now I understand where so much strength comes from. In parallel, a careful plan was being orchestrated with the help of Detective Inspector Maria Foster, a former university classmate of Richard's, who now headed a specialized fraud unit. After hearing the details of the case, the inspector recognized Veronica and Paul's modus operandi from other similar cases. They're clever, Maria explained during a discreet meeting at the mansion. They usually build schemes that border on illegality, but stay in legal gray areas that are hard to prosecute. This time, however, the fake invitation gives us grounds for an operation. The plan was simple but risky. An undercover police officer would go to the meeting in Beatrice's place. Equipped with microphones, she would record any attempt at intimidation or illicit proposal. The police would set up a discreet operation to monitor and intervene at the right moment. On the morning of the supposed symposium, the tension in the mansion was palpable. Beatrice had agreed to the plan, though she was clearly worried. Sitting in the library with Richard, she awaited news while trying to distract herself with a book she couldn't really read. It's going to work, Richard assured her, covering her hand with his. Maria is the best at what she does. Beatrice nodded, but her eyes revealed her anxiety. It's strange to think that someone who barely knows me could hate me enough to set a trap. It's not really about you, Richard explained. To Veronica, you represent everything she couldn't be. Authentic, dedicated, truly concerned for others. Besides. Richard hesitated, searching for the right words. Besides, she probably realized how I feel about you. The silence that followed was eloquent. It was the first time Richard had verbalized, even indirectly, the feelings that had been growing between them in recent weeks. And how do you feel? Beatrice finally asked, her voice almost a whisper. Before Richard could answer, the phone rang. It was Maria, reporting that the operation had been a success. Veronica and Paul had fallen into the trap, explicitly revealing their intentions to intimidate Beatrice into leaving her job at the mansion, claiming they had compromising information about her past. When pressed by the undercover officer, they also mentioned their previous plans involving Mrs. Eleanor. They're in custody, Maria informed them. The charges include attempted extortion, forgery, and, based on the recordings about Mrs. Eleanor's case, attempted harm through non-prescribed medication. This time, they won't get away easily. The news brought immense relief. When Richard hung up the phone and relayed the information to Beatrice, she let out a long sigh, as if she had been holding her breath for weeks. It's over then, she said, a hesitant smile appearing on her lips. It's over, Richard confirmed. They won't be able to threaten anyone for a long time. That evening, the mansion felt lighter, as if an invisible shadow had finally been lifted. During dinner, Mrs. Eleanor was particularly lively. chatting with Mrs. Gloria like old friends, sharing stories from their youth and comparing opinions on national politics with surprising lucidity. "I don't think I've ever seen my mother so happy here," Richard commented to Beatrice as they watched the two ladies from the dining room doorway. "Your mother is an extraordinary woman, intelligent, strong, determined, like her son." Richard smiled at the compliment. "Actually, I've recently discovered I'm not as strong as I thought, or maybe I'm strong in different ways than I imagined." "How so?" "I always believed my strength was in my ability to control situations, predict problems, find logical solutions. In business, that works perfectly. But in my personal life—" "In your personal life, strength can also mean vulnerability," Beatrice completed softly. "The courage to trust again after a betrayal. The ability to admit mistakes and move on." "Exactly," Richard agreed, impressed by her perception. "And speaking of moving on, you still haven't answered my offer about the community clinic project." Beatrice smiled, her face lighting up with genuine enthusiasm. "I've been thinking about it a lot. It's a dream that seemed impossible just a few weeks ago. And now? It seems like a lot of things that seemed impossible are becoming a reality," she replied, her gaze meeting his with a new intensity. Later that night, after the ladies had retired, Richard invited Beatrice for coffee on the main veranda. The London sky, usually obscured by pollution, surprisingly showed bright stars, as if celebrating the end of one cycle and the beginning of another. "You know," Richard began as they contemplated the night view, "I never imagined I would find someone like you after everything that happened." "Someone like me?" she asked, curious. "Someone real, without artifice or hidden agendas. Someone who does good not to gain an advantage, but because they simply can't act any other way." Beatrice blushed slightly at the compliment. "I'm not that perfect, Richard. I have my flaws, my insecurities." "That's exactly what makes you real," he interrupted gently. "Veronica was a flawless production, with no apparent faults, and completely fake. You, with your genuine concerns, your quiet dedication, your reluctance to accept compliments, you are the most authentic person I have ever met." A comfortable silence settled between them, not the awkward silence of people with nothing to say, but the complicit quiet of those who understand that some feelings transcend words. "What happened today," Beatrice said finally, "made me think about a lot of things. About how life sometimes puts us in unexpected situations that turn out to be exactly where we were meant to be. Like you taking care of my mother, or helping to uncover a conspiracy?" She smiled, her eyes reflecting the distant city lights. "Like me finding a family when I only expected to find a patient." Those simple words perfectly captured the transformation that had occurred. What had started as a professional arrangement had turned into genuine bonds between Beatrice and Mrs. Eleanor, between Mrs. Gloria and everyone in the mansion, and especially between Beatrice and Richard. "Tomorrow," he said, gently taking her hand, "I'd like to show you something, a location that could be perfect for expanding your social project." "Are you already thinking about that?" she asked, surprised. "I'm thinking about a lot of things for the future," he replied meaningfully. "And in all of them, you are present." The look they exchanged held unspoken promises and possibilities that were just beginning to take shape. The journey they had traveled, from the shadows of betrayal and deceit to this moment of genuine connection, seemed almost surreally perfect, as if fate had planned every detail. As the night deepened over London, in the Montgomery mansion, the first outlines of a new chapter began to form, not just for Richard and Beatrice, but for everyone who had been affected by the web of lies now finally undone. 3 months had passed since the arrest of Veronica and Paul. The legal proceedings were underway, with both facing multiple charges. The news had briefly occupied the society pages of London's major newspapers, but was soon replaced by other high society scandals. For Richard, that chapter was definitively closed. Autumn was giving way to the London winter, with cold mornings and sunny afternoons typical of June. The Montgomery mansion, once an environment marked by tension and mistrust, now radiated an atmosphere of renewal and harmony. On that particular morning, the activity was intense. Staff hurried about, carrying floral arrangements and organizing the main garden. A small celebration was being prepared, officially to celebrate Mrs. Eleanor's full recovery, but unofficially everyone knew there were more reasons to celebrate. "Are you sure this isn't too much?" Beatrice asked Judith, watching the conservatory being transformed into a space worthy of diplomatic receptions. The housekeeper smiled knowingly. "Nothing is too much when we have so many reasons to celebrate, my dear. Mrs. Eleanor's recovery, the opening of the new community clinic next week, and Beatrice prodded, pretending not to understand. "And other developments we've all witnessed in recent months," Judith completed with a discreet wink. The relationship between Richard and Beatrice had evolved naturally, with mutual respect and admiration, gradually turning into something deeper. Even so, they both maintained a discreet posture, especially considering she was still officially employed as Mrs. Eleanor's nurse, although the elderly woman no longer really needed specialized care. On the main veranda, Richard was finishing an important call with the director of the university hospital that had become a partner in the community clinic project. "Everything is confirmed for the opening next Thursday," he informed Beatrice as she approached. "The Secretary of Health has confirmed his attendance, as have 3 senior professors from the medical school who have committed to volunteer hours." Beatrice's eyes shone with restrained emotion. "I still can't believe we managed to turn that small project into a full-fledged clinic in such a short time." "We managed," Richard emphasized, moving closer to hold her hands. "It was your dream, your dedication, your tireless work that made this possible. I just provided the structure." An 800-square-meter structure with state-of-the-art equipment and a permanent professional team, she teased. "Just details, of course." Richard smiled, charmed by how she kept her feet on the ground, even in the face of the greatest achievements. It was precisely this authenticity that had won him over, Beatrice's ability to maintain her essence, regardless of external circumstances. In recent weeks, Richard had become personally involved in the clinic project, attending meetings with officials, negotiating equipment donations with suppliers, and even visiting the community to better understand its specific needs. For a businessman accustomed to the high-level corporate world, this immersion in the reality of the suburbs had been a transformative experience. "Do you know what impresses me most?" he commented as they walked through the garden overseeing the party preparations. "How you manage to maintain the same dedication and enthusiasm, whether you're caring for my mother in a Knightsbridge mansion or attending to families in the East End. Most people treat others differently based on their social status." "People are people," Beatrice replied simply. "Regardless of where they live or what they own, human dignity has no price or address." On the other side of the garden, Mrs. Eleanor and Mrs. Gloria were chatting animatedly, supervising the table arrangements with the natural authority of ladies accustomed to running large households. Beatrice's mother, initially reluctant to stay at the mansion after the case, was resolved, had eventually accepted the invitation for a longer stay. Her friendship with Mrs. Eleanor blossomed daily, both sharing not only life stories, but also a keen perception of the people around them, especially the growing affection between Richard and Beatrice. "Look at them," Beatrice commented, watching the 2 ladies. "Who would have thought they'd become such good friends?" "My mother has always had good taste in friends," Richard replied. "And in nurses too, apparently." Beatrice blushed slightly, still not entirely used to the constant compliments. "Speaking of which, we need to talk about my professional situation." "What do you mean?" "Your mother is fully recovered, Richard. She no longer needs specialized nursing care. To continue here in this role would be, well, it wouldn't be ethical." Richard nodded, understanding the seriousness of the issue. "You're right. I've always admired your professional integrity. Could we discuss this after today's celebration?" The party, initially planned as a small family gathering, had grown considerably. Besides the mansion staff and a few close relatives, the guest list now included Dr. Thompson, Detective Inspector Maria, and some collaborators from the community clinic project. It was a celebration that symbolized not only Mrs. Eleanor's recovery, but the closing of a difficult chapter and the beginning of new possibilities. As dusk fell and the strategically placed lights in the garden began to switch on automatically, creating an almost magical atmosphere among the tropical plants. The guests gradually arrived. Mrs. Eleanor, elegant in a navy blue suit, took on the role of main hostess with the vitality of someone who had been reborn after an ordeal. "My dear," she said to Beatrice during a quiet moment, "I can never thank you enough for everything you've done for me, and I don't just mean the medical care." "It was a privilege, Mrs. Eleanor. You are an extraordinary woman." "Not as extraordinary as you," the old woman replied, her sharp eyes fixed on Beatrice. "I knew from the very first day that you would be special for this house, for all of us." Before Beatrice could respond, they were interrupted by Richard, who approached with glasses of champagne for the toast that would officially begin the celebrations. The three of them moved to the center of the garden, where the guests were already forming an expectant semicircle. "Thank you all for being here today," Richard began, his firm voice echoing through the open space. "We celebrate not only my mother's full recovery, but also the valuable lessons the past few months have taught us." Knowing glances were exchanged among the attendees, especially those who knew the full story of recent events. "I learned that sometimes we must face the darkness to truly appreciate the light," he continued. "That trust, when well placed, can rebuild even the most wounded hearts. And that a person's true character is revealed not in times of triumph but in moments of adversity." His gaze met Beatrice's, who was watching him with restrained emotion. "I want to especially thank three extraordinary women who made this moment possible," Richard went on. "Detective Inspector Maria Foster, whose competence and dedication ensured that justice prevailed. Our dear Judith, whose love for this family transcends any definition of professional loyalty. And most importantly, Beatrice Oliver, who came into our lives as a dedicated professional and became, well, so much more than that." A collective smile spread among the guests, many already anticipating what was to come. "Beatrice," Richard continued, turning directly to her, "you mentioned earlier today that we needed to redefine your professional situation in this house, now that my mother has recovered. I completely agree. In fact, I have a specific proposal regarding that." Beatrice frowned, confused by the mention of a private matter at such a public moment. "I would like to propose that you officially leave the position of nurse to the Montgomery family," Richard declared, causing surprised murmurs among those who didn't understand the full context. Then, under the watchful eyes of everyone, especially Mrs. Eleanor and Mrs. Gloria, who were smiling knowingly, he approached Beatrice and to her surprise knelt down. "To take on, if you'll accept, the role of my life partner," he completed, taking a small velvet box from his pocket. "Beatrice Oliver, you transformed not only my mother's health, but my own ability to believe and trust again. I cannot imagine a future where you are not present. Would you do me the honor of sharing your life with me?" The silence that followed seemed to hold all the tension and expectation of the preceding months. Beatrice's eyes, normally so serene, were now brimming with emotion. For a moment, it seemed she couldn't find the words. "Richard," she said finally, her voice soft but firm, "when I agreed to care for your mother, I promised myself I would maintain a strictly professional relationship. It was the ethical thing to do. But then, he prompted, still kneeling. "But then you happened," she completed, a luminous smile spreading across her face. "With your dedication to your mother, your genuine respect for everyone around you, your ability to admit mistakes and grow from them, and most of all, with the way you see the world, not as a place to be conquered, but as a space where we can make a real difference in people's lives." She paused, taking a deep breath. "Yes, Richard Montgomery, I will share my life with you, not as your nurse, but as your partner, in every sense of the word." An explosion of applause and joyful exclamations filled the garden as Richard stood up to gently place the ring on Beatrice's finger, a classic emerald surrounded by small diamonds, elegant without being ostentatious, just like her. Mrs. Eleanor was the first to approach and embrace them, tears of happiness streaming freely down her face, still beautiful despite the marks of time. "I knew it from the very first day," she whispered in Beatrice's. "Kirs, I knew you were exactly what my son needed." The celebration that followed transcended its original purpose, becoming a true celebration of new beginnings. Amidst toasts, music, and lively conversations, Richard and Beatrice found a private moment on one of the more secluded garden benches. "Are you sure?" he asked, holding her hands in his. "I know it was an unexpected proposal, perhaps even rushed." Beatrice smiled, that authentic smile that had won over not just Richard, but the entire Montgomery family. "Actually, it wasn't that unexpected. Our mothers have been betting on when it would happen for weeks. Apparently, Mrs. Gloria won. She bet it would be before the clinic's opening." They both laughed, imagining the two ladies conspiring about their futures. "Speaking of the clinic," Beatrice continued, "this changes nothing about my commitment to the project. I intend to keep working there exactly as we planned." "I wouldn't expect anything different," Richard replied. "In fact, I was thinking of something even more ambitious. What if we expanded the model to other communities? A pilot project that could be replicated in different parts of the city, maybe even the country." Beatrice's eyes shone with the possibility. "That would be incredible, but it would require a much larger structure, significant investment, and committed partners," Richard completed. "Partners who believe that caring for people isn't just a matter of charity, but of basic social justice. That health is a right, not a privilege. Like us," she concluded, leaning in for a soft kiss. When they returned to the party, they were met with warm smiles and sincere congratulations. Dr. Thompson raised his glass in an informal toast. "To living proof that sometimes the most challenging circumstances can lead to the most beautiful outcomes." Detective Inspector Maria, who rarely showed emotion in her work, seemed genuinely moved. "If all my cases ended like this, Richard, maybe I wouldn't need that whiskey on Friday nights so much," she joked with him. The celebration continued into the night, with dinner served under the stars and lively conversations echoing through the illuminated garden. In a particularly touching moment, Mrs. Eleanor and Mrs. Gloria proposed a special toast. "Life teaches us in mysterious ways," began Mrs. Eleanor, her voice filled with the wisdom acquired over decades of experience. "What seemed like a tragedy, my illness, the manipulations I suffered, became the path to a greater, more authentic happiness for my son. And my daughter," Mrs. Gloria completed by her side, "who has always dedicated her life to caring for others and has finally found someone who cares for her with the same love and respect." In the weeks that followed, the Montgomery mansion breathed new life. Beatrice and Mrs. Gloria officially moved in, occupying a wing of the property that was renovated to provide the necessary privacy while maintaining the family closeness they all cherished. The community clinic opened with great success, attracting media attention not just for the significant investment, but primarily for its innovative approach that combined free medical care with preventive programs and community empowerment. On a quiet July afternoon, as they watched the sunset from the mansion's terrace, Richard and Beatrice reflected on the extraordinary journey that had brought them together. "If someone had told me 6 months ago that I would be here, like this, with you," Beatrice commented, "I would have thought it completely impossible." "Life is surprising," Richard replied, wrapping an arm around her shoulders, "especially when we learn to trust again despite the risks." The London skyline, with its skyscrapers silhouetted against the orange sky, seemed to perfectly symbolize the moment they were living, the grandeur of new possibilities opening up before them, while the authentic bonds they had built provided the security and comfort of a true home. "We're a family now," Beatrice whispered, resting her head on Richard's shoulder. "A family built not just by blood ties, but by conscious choices, mutual respect, and shared values." "The best kind of family," he agreed, gently kissing her forehead. "The one we choose to build every single day with true love and genuine respect." As night fell over the city, in the Montgomery mansion, old ghosts were finally laid to rest. What had once been a stage for deceit and betrayal now became the setting for a new story, one based on the authenticity that only truly free hearts can offer and receive. End of story. Dear listeners, we hope the story of Richard and Beatrice has warmed your hearts and shown how even in the most difficult situations, true love and integrity always find their way. To continue experiencing intense emotions like this, we have a special playlist with other emotional narratives. Find it by clicking here on the side. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, leave a like, and share it with others who also appreciate good stories of overcoming adversity and new beginnings. Every day we bring new stories that explore the complexities of life and the beauty of authentic love. We eagerly await your comments. What was the moment that moved you most in this journey of redemption and discovery?